Imagine standing in the middle of a luxury living room on the 95th floor, looking out at a view of Central Park that cost you $30 million, only to hear a sound like a freight train crashing through your walls. Suddenly, your high-end light fixtures start swaying. The water in your designer toilet bowl begins to slosh over the rim, and a massive crack snakes its way across your marble floor. This isn't a scene from a disaster movie. This is the reality for residents of 432 Park Avenue, a $3.1 billion skyscraper in New York City that has become the ultimate case study in engineering gone wrong. It was supposed to be the tallest residential building in the Western Hemisphere, a triumph of minimalist design and structural courage. Instead, it has become a vertical nightmare of floods, elevator failures, and terrifying noises that make the wealthiest people on Earth feel like they are trapped in a collapsing tin can. Today, we are stripping back the expensive glass facade to look at the terrible engineering decisions that turned a $3 billion dream into a billionaire's basement flood. To understand how a building this expensive can fail this badly, you have to understand the specific engineering trend that created it. For decades, New York was defined by sturdy, wide-based buildings like the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building. But land in Manhattan has become so scarce that developers move toward what we now call pencil towers. These are buildings with a slenderness ratio of 1 to 15, or even 1 to 20. Basically, they are architectural needles. 432 Park Avenue is the king of the needles. It stands nearly 1,400 feet tall but is only 93 feet wide. To give you some perspective, if you took a standard ruler and stood it up on its end, that is actually more stable than the proportions of this building. When you build something that thin, the primary enemy isn't gravity, it's the wind. The wind at 1,400 feet doesn't just push. It creates a phenomenon called vortex shedding. As wind hits a square building, it creates swirling eddies on the opposite side. These eddies pull the building back and forth, creating a rhythmic vibration that can literally shake a structure apart if not managed correctly. The engineers knew this would be an issue, so they came up with a brilliant solution that turned out to be the first major engineering flaw. They decided to leave every 12th floor of the building completely open. These are the blow-through floors, designed to let the wind pass right through the building instead of pushing against it. On paper, it works. In reality, it created a massive pressure differential. Imagine the building as a giant whistle. When the wind screams through those open floors at 80 miles per hour, it creates incredible pressure changes in the elevator shafts and stairwells. Residents started reporting that they couldn't open their apartment doors because the air pressure was so high it was essentially pinning the door shut. When they did manage to crack it open, the wind would whistle through the gaps with a screeching sound so loud it kept people awake at night. This is a $3 billion building where you need a team of people just to help you exit your own home when it's breezy outside. But the whistling was just the beginning. Let's talk about the plumbing, because this is where the engineering truly collapsed. In a building this tall, you cannot just pump water from the basement to the top. The pressure would explode the pipes at the bottom. So they installed series of massive water tanks and pumping stations on those open mechanical floors. Here is the problem. Remember how I said the building sways and vibrates? Those vibrations, combined with the extreme height, placed a level of stress on the plumbing joints that they simply weren't designed to handle. In 2018, the building suffered 2 massive floods in the span of a single month. One of these was caused by a flange on a high-pressure pipe that simply snapped on the 60th floor. Thousands of gallons of water cascaded down the elevator shafts, frying the electronics and leaving residents of the world's most expensive building forced to walk down 60 flights of stairs in the dark. Imagine paying $40 million for an apartment and having to hike a skyscraper because the plumbing system decided it couldn't handle the building's own movement. The elevators deserve their own chapter in this book of failures. In a normal building, elevators are pretty straightforward. In a needle tower that sways several feet in the wind, they are a nightmare. The cables that hang below the elevator cars are nearly a quarter-mile long. When the building sways, those cables start to swing like giant pendulums. If they swing too much, they can get caught on the internal structure of the shaft, which is a recipe for a catastrophic mechanical failure. To prevent this, the building's computers are programmed to slow down or completely stop the elevators when the wind hits a certain speed. This means that on a particularly windy day in New York, the people living at the top of 432 Park Avenue are effectively under house arrest. They are stuck at the top of a swaying tower with no way down except for the stairs. It turns out that $3 billion can buy you a lot of things, but it can't buy you a reliable ride to the lobby when there is a thunderstorm. Then there is the issue of the creaking. Every building sways, but engineers are supposed to dampen that movement so residents don't feel it. 432 Park used a massive tuned mass damper at the top, which is essentially two massive weights weighing hundreds of tons that move in the opposite direction of the building's sway. But because the building is so light and so thin, the dampening system can't catch every vibration. Residents have described the sound of the building as resembling a ghost ship. The walls moan, the floorboards click, and the ceramic tiles in the bathrooms literally pop off the walls because the building is flexing so much. There are reports of people getting motion sickness while sitting on their sofas. Think about that for a second. You are in your living room, and you feel like you are on the deck of a boat in the middle of the Atlantic. This is a fundamental failure of human-centric engineering. A building can be structurally safe while still being a psychological torture chamber for the people inside. The developers and engineers have spent years pointing fingers at each other, but the core of the problem is first-of-its-kind arrogance. When you build the tallest residential tower in the world, using a brand-new, ultra-thin design, you are essentially conducting a $3 billion experiment on human subjects. Many of the issues at 432 Park stem from the fact that the computer models used to design the building didn't account for how the materials would behave over time. Concrete creeps and shrinks, steel flexes. When you mix those two things at a height of 1,400 feet, the result is a building that is constantly changing shape. This leads to what engineers call differential shortening, where the inner core of the building settles at a different rate than the outer shell. This results in cracked walls, tilted floors, and windows that suddenly won't close correctly. And let us not forget the financial engineering, which was just as flawed as the structural engineering. The building was designed to maximize sellable square footage. This is why it is so thin. The developer wanted to cram as many view-centric apartments as possible on a tiny plot of land. Every square inch of the building was optimized for profit, not for livability. This led to cheapening out on the secondary systems. While they spent millions on the lobby marble and the kitchen countertops, the actual guts of the building, the pumps, the seals, the gaskets, and the insulation, were often standard-grade components being pushed to their absolute limits. It's like putting a lawnmower engine inside a Ferrari. It looks incredible until you try to drive it over 60 miles per hour. The impact of this failure on the New York real estate market has been massive. 432 Park Avenue was supposed to be the proof of concept that these ultra-thin towers were the future. Instead, it has become a giant warning sign. Potential buyers are now asking for wind reports and plumbing audits before they even look at a unit. The building has been hit with a massive $250 million lawsuit from the residents, who are claiming that the building is essentially uninhabitable during certain weather conditions. This is the ultimate irony. A building designed as a sanctuary for the world's elite has become a legal and structural burden that they are desperate to escape. When we look at the internal damage reports, they are truly shocking. We are talking about millions of dollars in water damage to individual apartments. Because the water in these towers is under such high pressure, a single pipe burst can flood 20 floors in a matter of minutes. In one instance, a leak on an upper floor was so powerful it actually warped the wood in the floors below, as if it had been hit by a tidal wave. The Residents Association has hired their own engineers who have found over 1,500 separate construction and design defects, from faulty wiring that causes frequent blackouts to trash chutes that sound like a bomb going off every time someone drops a bag of garbage down them. Why can't anyone save it? That is the question everyone asks. The problem with a skyscraper is that once it is finished, you can't easily fix the core engineering. You can't reach into the middle of a 1,000-foot tower and replace the plumbing system or change the slenderness ratio of the frame. You are stuck with the decisions that were made when the foundation was poured. The only solution is mitigation, which means spending millions of dollars a year to patch leaks, fix elevators, and keep the building from shaking itself apart. It is a perpetual maintenance machine that eats money. For the people who bought into the dream of 432 Park, they are realizing that their asset is actually a liability. The engineering failure here also highlights a larger issue in modern construction, the de-skilling of the oversight process. In the past, a project of this scale would have had independent inspectors and engineers checking every single bolt at every single level. But with the rush to finish these towers and start recouping the billions in loans, the oversight often becomes a formality. The people responsible for the design are often the ones responsible for checking it. This creates a congratulatory loop where everyone assumes the person next to them has done the math correctly. 432 Park is what happens when that loop breaks. Looking at the building from the street, it still looks like a masterpiece. The perfectly square windows, the white concrete, and the way it disappears into the clouds are all very impressive. But the beauty is a facade. It is a collapsing project, not in the sense that it is going to fall down tomorrow. It is structurally sound enough to stay upright, but it is collapsing in its function, a building that cannot reliably provide water, transportation, or peace and quiet is a failed building. It is a $3 billion sculpture that people just happen to be trying to live inside. The residents are now stuck in a holding pattern. They can't sell their apartments because the news of the building's failures is everywhere. Who wants to buy a $40 million flood risk? So they are forced to stay and fight the developers in court. It is a bizarre situation where some of the richest people on Earth are living in a building that behaves like a crumbling tenement house. It proves that money can buy the address, but it cannot buy the laws of physics. If the engineering is bad, no amount of wealth can make the walls stop creaking. This building will likely be studied by engineering students for the next 50 years as a what not to do. It will be the example used to explain why the slenderness of a tower must have a limit. It will be the cautionary tale about the importance of mechanical floor insulation and the dangers of ignoring air pressure differentials. But for the city of New York, it is also a lesson in urban planning. Is this really how we want to build our cities? Do we want a skyline filled with fragile needles that serve no one but the ultra-wealthy, and even then fail to serve them properly? The tragedy of 432 Park Avenue is that it was avoidable. There were engineers during the design phase who raised concerns about the wind and the plumbing. There were voices that said the building was too thin for its height, but those voices were drowned out by the lure of the record-breaking height and the massive profits that come with it. It is a story of greed overhauling common sense. In the world of high-rise construction, the ego is often the largest component in the mix, and when that ego meets the reality of the Manhattan wind, the wind always wins. As a listener, you might wonder why the city doesn't step in. The truth is, the city's building codes weren't prepared for the pencil tower era. The codes were written for standard buildings. These needles exist in a gray area of the law, where they meet the letter of the code, but violate the spirit of human safety and comfort. By the time the city realized what was happening, 432 Park and several others were already standing. Now the city has to figure out how to regulate these vertical experiments before the next one starts leaking or swaying even more dangerously. In the end, 432 Park Avenue stands as a monument to a gilded age of New York real estate that might be coming to a crashing halt. It is a reminder that the environment always has the final say. You can build as high as you want, and you can charge whatever price the market will bear. But if you don't respect the wind, the water, and the materials, they will eventually find a way to humble you. The residents of 432 Park are learning that lesson every time the wind picks up and their elevators stop working. They are living in the most expensive engineering failure in history, and it is a long, shaky way down from the top. The building's management has recently tried to implement fixes, such as adding extra weight to the damping systems and putting rubber seals around every single door in the building to stop the whistling. But these are just bandages on a broken bone. The fundamental design of the tower, the square shape and the extreme height-to-width ratio is the problem. To truly fix it, you would have to change the shape of the building itself. Since that is impossible, the $3.1 billion collapse will continue to be a story of managing symptoms rather than curing the disease. For those of us watching from the ground, 432 Park is a beautiful, if haunting, sight. It represents the peak of human ambition and the depth of human error. It is a reminder that even the strongest glass and the hardest concrete are no match for a bad idea. As we watch more of these pencil towers go up around the world, from Dubai to London, we have to hope that the engineers are looking at the cracked tiles and flooded hallways of Park Avenue and taking notes. Because if they don't, the next billionaire's dream might turn into an even bigger nightmare. The story ends where it started, on that 95th floor. The view is still there. The park is still beautiful. The lights of the city still sparkle like diamonds. But the feeling of security, the sense of being home, is gone. In its place is the constant, nagging fear of the next creak, the next whistle, or the next burst pipe. It is the cost of living on the edge of the impossible, and as the residents of 432 Park Avenue know all too well, It is a price that is much higher than $30 million. It is a price measured in peace of mind. And that is something that even the most talented engineer in the world can't build back once it is lost. So the next time you see a skyscraper rising into the heavens, thin as a toothpick and gleaming with pride, don't just admire the view. Think about the pipes. Think about the wind. Think about the people stuck in the elevators, waiting for the world to stop swaying. Because behind every great skyline, there is a battle being fought between human ego and the laws of nature. And at 432 Park Avenue, nature is currently in the lead. This is the legacy of the $3 billion failing project. A giant glass warning to stay grounded, even when you're aiming for the stars. We'll be watching to see what happens next in this saga of high-rise hubris. But for now, the lesson remains clear. If you're going to build the world's tallest residential tower, you better make sure it's more than just a pretty face in the clouds. It needs to be a place to live, not just a place to exist in fear. And until 125 Greenwich and 432 Park can prove they've fixed their fundamental flaws, they will remain the most expensive stay-away signs in history.